figure out how many tiles will be in each one. So that's how we draw a graph. But what I wanted to do was like sort of try to connect, how do we see the other parts of, all of the parts of our pattern in the graph that we see everywhere else. So we already see where the y is. Y is the value along of the number of tiles. X is the figure number, so it's just like how far this way something is. And Y is just how far up something is, and X is how far to the right something is. But then, and then the starting amount, B, is also pretty easy to see. It's the starting amount, so I'm circling it here in green, and I'm actually going to use a green highlighter as well to highlight that point, to show like the place where we see green is like where, it's actually where this line crosses Y, because the y-axis, where does it cross the y-axis? Because that's at when X is 0. So the y-axis always crosses where the figure number is 0. But the thing about M is like, where do we see M? M is 2 for this pattern. And so the place that we see M is right here. I'm going to draw it for you real quick. So M is how many tiles get increased every time. So like, in order to get to the next, from figure 1, in order to get to figure 2, I have to go up 2 tiles. So it's like it goes up 2 tiles and up 2 tiles. But the reason that it doesn't go straight up is because the other thing that's changing is the change in the figure number. And the change in the figure number, I've actually titled, I showed it to you guys in orange earlier. So we looked at how the figure number is increasing by 1 every time up here. The way that we see that is here. The figure number increases by 1. And I know it's confusing. I use 2. I use different, it's 2 tiles for each one. But if you look, like I used a different scale. These numbers are all 1 apart, and these numbers are 2 apart. And that's okay. But I could see, it's okay that I did that, but I could see that you guys would get confused. So I'm going to label that each one of these is increasing by 1. And I'm also going to label that the tiles, as the figure numbers increase by 1, the tiles are going to increase by 2. And so we see that every time. But here's the thing that I was talking about earlier. Earlier we said M is the growth. And we said that the growth was 2. And that's true, because as the figure numbers increase by 1, the growth does increase by 2. But we did show this other time on this table up here where the growth increased by 8. And sort of the question is, where do I see that on the graph? Where do I see it increasing by 8? And the answer is I see it right here. Like if I go over from figure 4, remember it increased from figure 4. If I go over here from figure 4, if I go over from figure 4, then when I get to figure 8, I can go up to there. And this is plus 8. So here we see how it does increase by 8. But notice that when it's doing that, the figure number is increasing by 4. So I wanted to go back to talk, the reason why we're bringing this up though, is I want to go back and talk about what does M really mean? M is the growth. And we say the growth is the increase in tiles, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. It's actually the increase of tiles for every figure number that increases. So M, I'm going to add to my definition of M. M is equal to the change in Y, but it's a ratio, so it's actually the change in Y divided by the change in X. So when Y is changing by, or when X is changing by 1, Y is changing by 2, M is 2 because it's 2 divided by 1. But when it's increasing by 8, the change in x is 4, and so we would do 8 divided by 4, and that is still 2. So 2 divided by 1 equals 2, and 8 divided by 4 equals 2. So m is going to be equal to 2 no matter what. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to highlight all that. Oops. I'm going to highlight that yellow. I'm going to highlight it yellow, not green, so you guys can see that. And so we can see where our change in x is. So another way that we put this, and I'll never forget my 6th grade teacher explaining this part to me, this was like the only thing I understood about this when I was in middle school, is the m is equal to, it is equal to the rise, and I like to think about this as like stairs. Rise is the distance up, how far something goes up, you rise up, so it is the rise. And when you run side to side, right? You don't run up, you run. You don't run up in the air, you run along the ground. So they call this the run. So we're going to say it's the rise over the run. And once again, the rise is the direction up, the run is the direction across. So the rise is the increase in y, the run is the increase in x. Something happened here. So we say the run is equal to 4, and then down here the run is equal to 1. Up at the top, the rise is equal to 8, and then on these little guys down here, the rise is equal to 2. So if I was to show this in my rule, so my rule really means, so I would show my y is equal to, I have all these different colors now, so bear with me while I change colors. Y is equal to the rise over the run, because m is equal to the rise over the run. So we've been saying y equals mx plus b, but the way that we get m is we can look at a graph, or we can look at a chart, or a table, or we can look at our figures and we can say, how much is the tile count increasing and how much are the figures increasing? So then we have an x, I guess x is pink, and then we're adding b. We're adding b. So for this one, what we would say there's 2 ways I could figure this out. If I was looking at any part of this table here, I could look at the increase from 1 to the other, from figure 1 to 2, or figure 2 to 3, or figure 3 to 4, and look at the run goes across the top here and the rise is on the bottom. So if I'm looking at that, I could say, well, y is equal to the rise, which is 2, over the run, which is 1, and then multiply that by x, which is, I don't really know, and then plus b, which I do know b is always 5. It doesn't matter where I use that. Or I could say, and then if I do that math, right, like if I do this math, 2 divided by 1, it still equals 2. Like it's the same amounts. 2 divided by 1 is still 2x plus, and then plus 5 is still plus 5. So all that's the same. But I could also do it like this. So just to be clear, that will give me y equals two x plus 5 still. And then, but I could do it again, and I could use my other set of data. Like, what if I didn't have any of this information, and all I had was this dot here and this dot here, and none of the other dots? I could go, well, I also know that when the rise is 8, I would make the rise 8, and then I would go divided by the run, which is 4, times x, and then plus the starting amount, which is still 5. that when I do that, it's still the same thing. I'm still going to have y equals, and I have to do, instead of doing 2 divided by 1, now I'm going to do 8 divided by 4. But what is 8 divided by 4? 8 divided by 4 is still 2. So it doesn't matter which rise and run. It doesn't matter like what the rise and run are. As long as you use a rise and a run that go together, then it's just fine. So I just wanted to show you guys that too. So that m is equal to, m is really talking about a ratio of like how much something grows over the amount of time that it takes. So like if you were talking about how much you have grown, you could say, boy, I grew a whole foot this year. Somebody could look back and go, wow, you grew 1 foot per year. Or they could look back and they could go, well, there's 12 months in a year and there's 12 inches in, they could go, well, there's 12 inches in a foot. And so 12 divided by 12 is still 1. You still grew 1 foot per year. You're still at or 1 inch per month. It's still a ratio. Or 6 inches in 6 months. That would still work. So that's just sort of what they're talking about with growth. Or if you said, I made $5 an hour, you could have $5 over 1 hour, which would be 5 divided by 1. Or you could say, I made $40 in 8 hours, and you do 40 divided by 8, and you would still get 5. So it's just a ratio. M is a ratio like that. Well, that is, I think, just about everything I want you guys to know about the different representations of how a pattern is growing. So please let me know when you have questions. I'm sure you will have some, and hopefully if you're paying attention in class, you don't have as many, but if you weren't able to make it, or you're just missing things out, or it's just hard to pay attention, you can watch this video. I hope it makes sense. And then